Hello, everybody. Welcome, workers and friends. I'm one of your hosts, Dust James, the Marxist-Leninist truck driver, coming to you live from my humble home in rural North Carolina. As always, I'm joined with my host, Australian Union organizer, Brother David Fox. How you doing?
Very good, thank you. And I'm live here from regional Victoria, Indigo.
Right on. So we're actually being joined from Comrade Andersen in an undisclosed work location. How you doing?
Fantastic here. Thank you for having me, Judge James. And my location here is Aurora, Colorado, and I'm in my lunch break, so nothing special. But I'm glad to get to be here with all two of you.
Right on. Right. So we're going to get right into the material. We're continuing our study series on demands of the people, revolutionary demands, demands that change society, that uplift and push history forward. And we've done the Panthers. And now we're getting into Emiliano Zapata, Plan de Ayala. This was written in 1911. This was the demands of a revolutionary force of mostly peasants. Their demands were not met with the government in power, and they decided to keep fighting. And these were their demands to put down arms. So, anybody else have any further introductory remarks?
I'd like to start with David Fox.
Yeah, I was. Look, this is something that's new to me. It's good to know actually other movements around the world, what their demands were, other organisations as well, of what their demands were, putting the way forward. It's a great way to study. I know when we had our live study, we are the unions. We are the Builders Australia live study group because we study Peru Libre, the whole program. It's interesting how we can discuss about, but developing our own plans, following on from what our discussions were.
Comrade Andersen, any introductory remarks?
Yes. So when I first started to get interest in the Mexican Revolution through Pancho Villa to Emiliano Zapata, through the rebellion in the south and to the north, it's been a rough history because it was that time period that there was a dictatorship in Mexico, and the people demand change. They demand democracy. They demand land, justice. So it wasn't just started by the people. It was started by one man who exiled in Texas and say the revolution starts and through Mexico, and the people realized that we need a revolution. So that's where Zapata, Pancho Villa comes in, and afterwards, Zapata and his compañeros started a plan, and which we all know today, Plan Ayala. So it was a really special time because at that time period comes when the revolution starts in Mexico. Coincidentally, the Russian Revolution happened, and it became a time lapse of people rising up for demand change to end tyranny, and that's basically what happened in the history books, and it's remarkable, in all honesty.
Right on. So I think I think the Mexican Revolution is underestimated in its significance. Just 6 years later, in 1917, the Russian Revolution took place, the first large-scale socialist revolution. And even though Marx said that the revolution would come from the urban proletariat, in the case of Russia, it was still primarily the peasantry. And the Mexican Revolution was primarily a peasant revolution. So I think Stalin really borrowed a lot from the time period, a lot from the zeitgeist, and actually builded on the revolutionary energy of the Mexican Revolution. and I think it's not studied enough. And I think a lot of that has to do with Eurocentrism um, within the Western movement. I know that a lot of Black nationalists also have a lot of respect for the Mexican Revolution, and I think we cannot downplay its significance. So, without further ado, we're going to get right into it. Brother Anderson, if you want to read the small intro before we get into the demands.
Of course. So I have it right here, as you can see, right here. So let's start. Hang on. Plan of Ayala, created by Emmanuel Zapata and Otilio Montano, November 28th, 1911. The liberating plan of the sons of the same Morales, affiliated with the insurgent army, which defends the fulfillment of the plan of San Luis, with the reforms which it has believed proper to add in benefit of the Mexican fatherland. We, who, under sign, constitute a revolutionary junta to sustain and carry out the promises which the revolution of November 20th, 1910, just passed, made to the country, declare solemnly before the face of the civilized world, which judges us, and before the nation to which we belong and which we call love, propositions which we have formulated, sorry, formulated to end the tyranny which oppresses us and redeem the fatherland from the dictatorships which are imposed on us, which propositions are determined in the following plan. To you, Justice.
See, number one, take into consideration that the Mexican people, led by Don Francisco I. Madero, went to shed their blood to reconquer liberties and recover their rights, which had trampled upon. For a man to take possession of power, violating the sacred principles which he took an oath to defend under the slogan, effective suffrage and no re-election, outraging thus the faith, the cause, the justice, and the liberties of the people. Take into consideration that the man to whom we refer to, Don Francisco I. Madero, the same who initiated the above cited revolution, who imposed his will and influence as a governing norm of the provisional government of the ex-president of the Republic, attorney Francisco L. de Barra, causing with deed repeated shedding blood and multiple misfortunes for the fatherland in a manner deceitful and ridiculous, having no intentions other than satisfying his personal ambitions, his boundless instincts as a tyrant, and his profound disrespect for the fulfillment of the pre-existing law emanating from the immortal code of 57 Constitution 1857, written with the revolutionary blood of Ayala, taking into account that the so-called chief of the liberating revolution of Mexico, Don Francisco I. Madero, through lack of integrity and highest weakness, did not carry to happy end the revolution which gloriously he initiated with the help of God and people, since he left standing most of the governing powers and corrupted elements of oppression of the dictatorial government of Porfirio Diaz, which are not nor can in any way be representation of national sovereignty, and which for being most bitter adversaries of our and the principles which ever now we defend are provoking the discomfort of the country and opening new wounds in the bosom of the fatherland, to give it its own blood to drink, taking also into account the aforementioned Sir Francisco I. Madero, present president of the Republic, tries to avoid the fulfillment of the promises which he made to the nation in the Plan de San Luis Potosí, being the above cited promises to agreements of Ciudad Juarez, by means of false promises and numerous intrigues against the nation, nullifying, pursuing, jailing, or killing revolutionary elements who helped him to occupy high post of president of the Republic, taking into consideration that the so-called repeated Francisco I. Madero has tried with the brute force of bayonets to shut up and drown in blood the pueblos who ask, solicit, or demand from him to the fulfillment of the promises of the revolution, calling them bandits and rebels, condemning them to a war of extinction without conceding or granting a single one of the guarantees which reason, justice, and law prescribe, taking equally into consideration that the President of the Republic, F.I. Madero, was made of effective suffrage a bloody trick of the people, already against the will of the same people, imposing attorney Jose M. Pino Suarez and the vice presidency of the Republic, or imposing as governors of the state, designated by him, like the so-called Ambroso Figueroa, scourge and tyrant of the people of Morelos, or entering into change and follow the pattern of new dictatorship more shameful and more terrible than that of Porfirio Diaz. For it has been clear that the patent that he has outraged the sovereignty of the states, trampling on the laws without any respect for the rights or interest, as has happened in the state of Morelos and others, leading them to the most horrendous anarchy which contemporary history registers. For these considerations, we declare the aforementioned F.I. Madero inept at realizing the promises of the revolution, which he was the author of, because he has betrayed the principles in which he tricked the will of the people and was able to get into power, incapable of governing, because he has no respect for the law and the justice of the pueblos, and a traitor of the fatherland, because he is humiliating in blood and fire Mexicanos who want liberty, as to please the cienfacos, landlords and bosses who enslave us. And for today on, we will begin to continue revolution, begin by him until we achieve the overthrow of the dictatorial power which exists.
2. Recognition is withdrawn from S. Francisco I. Madero as chief of the revolution and as president of the republic, for the reasons which before were expressed with being attempted to overthrow this official.
Tercero, recognized as chief of the liberating revolution is the illustrious General Pascual Orozco, the second of the leader, Don Francisco I. Madero. In case he does not accept this delicate post, recognition as chief of the revolution will go to General Don Emiliano Zapata.
4. The revolutionary junta of the state of Morelos manifests to the nation under formal oath that it makes its own plan of San Luis Potosí, with the additions which are expressed below, in benefit of the oppressed pueblos. It will make itself the defender of the principles it defends until victory or death.
Where are we? Yes, 5. The revolutionary junta of the state of Morelos will admit no transactions or compromises until it achieves the overthrow of the dictatorial elements of Porfirio Diaz and Francisco I. Madero, for the nation is tired of false men and traitors who make promises and who, on arriving in power, forget them and can constitute themselves as tyrants.
Says, as an additional part of the plan, we give notice that regarding the fields, timber, and water which the landlords, científicos, or bosses have usurped, the pueblos or citizens who have the titles corresponding to those properties will immediately enter into possession of that real estate of which they have been despoiled by the bad faith of our oppressors, maintain at any cost with arms in hand the mentioned possession, and the usurpers, who cost, consider themselves with a right to them those properties will deduce it before the special tribunals which will be established on the time of the revolution.
7. In virtue of the fact that the immense majority of the Mexican pueblos and citizens are owners or no more than the land they walk on, suffering the horrors of poverty, without being able to improve their social condition in any way or to dedicate themselves to industry or agriculture, because the lands, timber, and water are monopolized in a few hands. For this cause, there will be expropriation, the third part of these monopolies, from the powerful proprietarios of them, with prior indemnation, in order that the pueblos and citizens of Mexico may obtain ejidos, colonies, and foundations for pueblos, or fields for sowing or laboring, and the Mexicans' lack of prosperity and well being may be improved in all and for all.
8. Regarding the landlords, scientificals or bosses who oppose the present plan directly or indirectly, their goods will be nationalised and the two-third parts which otherwise would belong to them will go for indemnisations of war, pensions for widows and orphans for the victims who succumb to the struggle for the present plan.
Nuevo, in order to execute the process procedures regarding the properties aforementioned, the laws of the disamortization and nationalization will be applied as they fit for serving us as norm and example can be those laws put in force by the immortal Juarez on eschatological or celestial properties, which punish the despots and conservatives who, in every time, have tried to impose on us the ignominious yoke of oppression and backwardness.
10. The insurgent military chiefs of the Republic, who rose up with arms in hand at the voice of Don Francisco I. Madero to defend the plan of San Luis Potosi, and who oppose with armed force the present plan. We will be judged traitors to the cause which they defended and to the fatherland, since it prenticed many of them to humor the tyrants for a fistful of coins, for bribes or convenience, are shedding the blood of their brothers who claim the fulfillment of the promises which Don Francisco I. Maduro made to the nation.
11. The expenses of war will be taken in conformity with Article 11 of the Plan of San Luis Potosi, and all procedures employed in the revolution we undertake will be in conformity with the same instructions, which the said plan determines.
12. Once triumphant, the revolution which we carry into the path of reality, a junta of the principal revolutionary chiefs from the different states will name or designate an interim president of the republic who will convoke elections for the organizations of the federal powers.
13. The principal revolutionary chiefs of each state will designate in junta the governor of the state to which they belong, and this appointed official will convoke elections for the due organization of the public powers. The object being to avoid compulsory appointments which work the misfortune of the pueblos. Like the so well known appointment of Ambrosio Figueroa in the state of Morelos, and others who drive us to the precipice of bloody conflicts sustained by the caprice of the dictator Madero and the circle of cientificos and landlords who have influenced him.
14. The President Madero and other dictatorial elements of the present former regime want to avoid the immense misfortunes which afflict the fatherland, and, if they possess true sentiments of love for it, let them make immediate renunciation of the post they occupy, and with that they will with something staunch the grave wounds which they have opened in the bosom of the fatherland. Since, if they do not do so, on their heads will fall the blood and the anathema of their brothers.
15. Mexicans consider that the cunning and bad faith of white men is shedding blood in a scandalous manner because he is incapable of governing. Consider that his system of government is choking the fatherland and trampling with the brute force of bayonets on our institutions, and thus, as we raise up our weapons to elevate him to power, we again raise them up against him for defaulting on his promises to the Mexican people and for having betrayed the revolution initiated by him. We are not personalists, we are partisans of principles and not of men.
Beautiful, beautiful. Wow, that is quick and powerful.
Actually, this is the
Historical.
last one.
Go ahead.
Mexican people, support this plan with arms in hand, and you will make the prosperity and well-being of the fatherlands liberty, justice, and law. Ayala,
Nice. My
November
bad.
25th,
My bad.
1911.
My bad. My bad. But anyway,
So,
that very powerful. Very, and then it has the signed generals, Emiliano,
mm,
Zapata, and his brother, among others. Um, very powerful. Very
yes,
beautiful statement. Um, Anderson, what's your initial response?
it's pretty powerful. I would say this, that this is where the Mexican people realized that this was their true leader, Emiliano Zapata, not to the so-called like pre-revolutionaries, because they just like they're fake revolutionaries. They're just politicians that grab power, like the dictator Francisco. And it's just this plan right here shows that this man right here and the original Zapatistas, they actually care about Mexico. They actually care about the peasantry that's going on like in the south and like everywhere. And because of this plan, this right here shows that the people needed a leader who like respects them, who demands their voices to be heard, and demands to like have a government that actually cares for the people of Mexico. And Emiliano Zapata wrote this plan just to show that the Mexican people and him are not afraid of this dictatorial bastard in Mexico.
Right on, brother Fox.
Well, it's interesting. I try not to be too silent, analytic on this, but it's good to know the history of the struggle in countries like Mexico. Because in Australia here, we don't know as much of that history that we like to, most of us. I think it's good to know that what common struggles around the world, what struggles around the world people are taking in their respective countries, and been such an historical thing. And what's important about this, it laid out a plan for their struggle. It wasn't just like, okay, we're going to fight against a tyrant. But this is what we want to put into place straight after. And I think I think that's vitally essential to have that as well. And well, when people are up against something, they're up against something, and they've come up with an alternative, and that's something we need to always keep in the mind. But it certainly is inspirational stuff. I mean, as I said, I do apologise for my ignorance about the history of Mexico. I mean, it's not because it's it's not a big subject matter that I'm completely familiar with. But looking at this, it shows you there they were actually developing a way forward. These were people right at the coalface of the struggle. They knew where they had to go and how to move forward. And I think that's vitally important. They just didn't come up with a great idea and let's do this out of nowhere. It was the material conditions that determined this, and that's what I wanted to get to. Yeah, what was determining it at the time? The material conditions were determining the outcome of the struggle as well, and the way forward.
Mm, very good. So I think this is the nature of a lot of violent revolutions. Violence is war is a horrible
Mm,
fate.
mm,
Death, destruction, mental problems that come, just almost like generational trauma that happens from war. So you can hear the high emotions. the everything on the line, liberty or death, and the statement of the people in motion. And a lot of times, um, something will once the violence erupts, it's hard to get a hold of where it's going to stop. Where once the chips are up in the air, it's like, where are the chips going to fall? And you can look at the American Revolution. And the American Revolution, a lot of the poor farmers, the non-slave owners, the so-called yeoman farmers of the North, like um, Daniel Shea, continued to fight after the establishment of the revolution, because they realized bankers, like George Washington, weren't going to treat the small farmers with respect. And in the case of the United States, the bankers like George Washington came to power, and Daniel Shea's forces were brutally suppressed. And there wasn't really any land reform until over 100 years later, when they stole indigenous land out west and gave it to white people later on. And even that had to do with a lot of that history had to do with something through my heritage in upstate New York. Was there was actually a tenement farmers revolt against the Dutch landowners, um, in the United States as well, that kind of pushed the giving way of Indian native land out west. So, and if we look at the French Revolution, and the French Revolution, which was Fidel Castro's one of Fidel Castro's favorite subjects, once the violent unreached, there was a wave of different people taking power, and it's similar to Mexico. You had Madero came to power, and then the people who took up arms and went for the revolution, wanted rights, wanted democracy. He came to power, and he's not giving it. Zapata's like, he's not giving us anything. We're going to keep fighting. But where the U.S. Revolution stopped, the Mexican Revolution kept going. And Emiliano Zapata, united with Pancho Villa and the forces of the North, they got land reform. They got land reform on an epic scale that had never been seen in history. And to this day, there is land holdings of the southern Mexican people. And they were able to live off that land until 1994, when Bill Clinton passed NAFTA. And when NAFTA went into place, it flooded southern Mexico with cheap farm. And then on January 1st, 1994, the Zapatista movement in Chiapas, because this was the year that NAFTA was going to go in effect, and they knew the economic devastation that would happen to the Corn Belt. They took up arms against the state, and they called it the Zapatista movement, because they realized that the power to feed themselves, the freedom, the dignity that came would be lost when NAFTA took effect. The Zapatistas still have an autonomous region. They called off their national revolution, and they've become a small autonomous region that has actually worked with the Mexican government in some capacity. They're less, they're still very positive, and they had an interesting mix of political ideologies, a lot of it borrowing from the indigenous people. But what's interesting about where I live in North Carolina, which is tobacco country, a huge, almost in the entirety of the labor of the largely undocumented migrants or people on HB visas are from southern Mexico, are from the region, and fled the region of the peasants who lived from 19 in the almost 100 years, 80 years, who lived for 80 years off the land they won in the Mexican Revolution, had to flee their land because of destitute poverty. of the expanse of U.S. imperialism. And so Zapata is very important to the immigrant community of my coworkers and my friends and loved ones and family members. Comrade Andersen, I know I put a lot out there, but any further ideas on these subjects?
So yeah, like when I heard that you said like about the Zapatistas born from the indigenous people, like when they started, the army itself are full of indigenous people and full of poor people because they realized that they don't want like their land to be taken by multinational corporations, you know. And it didn't start like in 1994. It started like in 1983, I think so. And from what I understand, they did borrow from the elements of Emilio Zapata, but from the communiques which I read, they have a book about their communiques, and for what they said, and they are not like anarchists, they're not communists, they're not socialists, but what they are is like they're trying to build a better world. And as far as my perspective, we communists, we support that, you know. And from that point, you know, they still have the autonomous region in Chiapas, no doubt, but their numbers are bigger than we expected because they were small from the beginning, but now they're bigger than ever. And they're doing very well, you know. And the famous sub commander, Marcos, I don't know if everybody hears this, but he he changed his name to Marcos to Galeano in honor for his teacher, for his friend Galeano, because one of the right wing paramilitaries came in and started shooting out the school, and his friend Galeano got shot by one of the paramilitary right wingers. So what happened was when he died, Marcos changed his name to honor his friend, and right now today the Zapatista movement in Chiapas is stronger than ever before.
Right on. Actually, just a quick question for the, especially for our Australian viewers or our future viewers. Can you just outline the area where the autonomous zone is in Mexico?
I would say the base, I would think, is somewhere in San Cristobal Las Casas. I think this place called Authentique. It's a community somewhere like somewhere in a church and somewhere in the city outside of it. I can't precisely like would say that that is it, but I would know that like somewhere in the Lacana jungle there might be Zapatista like operations there. You know, I know they still like still give up arms, but they still have weapons. You know, so in my perspective, they're still like somewhere like in the southern forest of Chiapas or somewhere in Authentique.
Oh.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, so I mean this is big stuff. I mean the indigenous, predominantly indigenous people, landless, exploited. Um, he had a dictatorship on top of a dictator. You think about even the like, so you had the independence, like 100 years before this, and then after that, the U.S. had basically been controlling Porfirio Diaz, had been building railroads and taxing the people. And you had it where even the upper classes were angry at the situation of how bad, how nationally exploited, how oppressed. Mexico was basically a resource for the United States to take things out of. And the United States had stolen half of Mexico's territory in the so-called Mexican American War less than 100 years before this. And then the United States owned Mexican oil, and the U.S. oil companies were just extracting those oil resources. Pancho Villa actually, took over the oil companies and expropriated it for the Mexican people in a lot of views. So even you had even the upper classes were angry at how bad their country was being fucked. So Then you had the revolution in the peasantry and the working class join in. And there was also union strikes that led up to it. And then when it started fighting, the upper classes took power, and they were going to do like, they were going to work with the landlords and do this and that. And they didn't give nothing to the peasants, and the peasants kept fighting. They got their land in the South. They still have that land to this day. And I read some books um, about Aslan, about the labor movements in California. And if we go back to the 1940s, we go back in right before the Great Depression happened in the United States. There was a lot of Mexican labor in the fields. I mean, a lot of Chicanos never left the Southwest. The border crossed them, but also a lot of people came up into the United States prior to with the boom of the 1920s and with right before the recession. And then when the recession hit, there was Operation Wetback, where they actually deported anybody that looked Mexican. It didn't matter if they were Chicanos and their family had been there for hundreds of years. There was mass ethnic-based deportation in the Great Depression. The country that supposedly fought against the Nazis, they did fight against the Nazis, but a country that was supposed to stand for something good was ethnic, and this ain't heard about deporting people simply based on their ethnicity during the Great Depression. A lot of racism was involved, and the treatment of the workers was disgusting. They would actually pin Mexicans against the Dust Bowls in the Great Depression. A lot of mostly white economic refugees that fled the middle of the country, Okies, like Oklahoma, was a derogatory term for white economic refugees who fled the Dust Bowl around the Great Depression. Well, they would pin the Okies against the Chicano workers, and they would give slightly better conditions to the white workers than the Mexican workers, as a tiered labor system. And what is known in the history is the militancy of the Mexican people, and the militancy in the union movement in that time period not only benefited the Mexican people, but also raised wages for the white workers that worked alongside them, even though they were being treated better than them. The fighting spirit of the Mexican people lasted on into U.S. history, Southwest history, and Chicano history. And I read this book. I think it's Esperanza. I think that the book Esperanza, that talks about somebody's grandma, and the book is somewhat classist, saying that was actually downplaying and saying, oh, they're too revolutionary and they need to be quiet, and part of that. I know I put a lot out there, brother Andersen. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I never got a chance to read Esperanza, but that story the between the white workers and like the Mexican workers, that just goes to show that even before the Nazis, there was still hatred to everyone who was different. Regardless of everywhere, in Europe, Africa, Asia, North America, it's it's just not right. Because at the time, people are people. If people don't accept who they are, then that's a problem. That's goes to show that the economic system capitalism does to people who are different, and to treat others who are who are white get the special treatment. Other people who are different don't deserve better treatment. Which is not right.
Mm. Yes, the name of the book was Esperanza Rising, and it was written by a Chicana a half white, half Chicana intellectual. And in the book, their grandma actually was rich, but because of political turmoil, came to the United States, and they the conflict with Mexicans who were more militant because of the revolution, and because of their class background, were making fun of the other Mexicans for being too militant and too revolutionary. The book, in my opinion, was a little bit liberal when I read it, but it's absolutely a beautiful book. Esperanza Rising. I suggest people read that as well. We've been going on 40 minutes. How are you on time, Comrade Andersen?
I still have 5 minutes left. Do you mind if I say
Okay.
something real quick before I
Hey, go ahead and go ahead and do a final concluding remark before you head off.
Thank you. So yeah, I have been like doing videos lately. So because of like this one event that I'm doing right now, and I believe you heard about it, Judge Jace, because you've been sharing it to my Facebook, the People's Sports Day, and it's been coming on May 18th on 2 p.m. And I'm inviting every American communist, like throughout America in Colorado, not just like communists, but like union workers and like comrades who are like for the struggle. If they can like have the chance to like connect with each other face to face, meet up, and to have fun to play sports, you give it the right place because I'm building it for everyone to come and play, and it's coming on May 18th, FYI. And if you want Dutch James, I'm inviting you too. You know.
I wish I had the money to get out the time off to get out to Colorado, but as you said, I'll put a link in the description of the video to your Facebook post about it. If anybody's interested in meeting brother Comrade Andersen and playing some sports on his sports day on the 18th in Colorado, please look into that. Right on, brother.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I believe if I remember this correctly, I could cover by Petro X. I don't believe you heard of him, but he came up with the idea of meeting with patriotic socialists and revolution nationalists to like talk to each other, like through live stream like this. You know, like you, Dust James, and David Fox, and me. Like we're like different. You know, we're different comrades, and we have different ideas, but we are sharing the same struggle. You know, and that's like the most important part. And Pedro X is like one of those people who should like are like the reason that we should like connect to these other groups. You know, and he told me a story about Anti-Conquista was probably like what I'm about to do, you know, a sports day for everybody. What happened was they planned it, but nothing happened. So to me, I'm like the he said I'm the, like the second person to like tell him that, you know. So yeah, so which is crazy because nobody like came up with the idea of building a sports day for communists through like everywhere, but like this guy right here, you know, and I'm like the first one to do it, but I'm gonna do it. I'm not gonna cancel it. I am not gonna like just like destroy it. I'm definitely held on schedule for playing on this, and everyone is invited to this event.
Mm. Right on, brother. I wish I could make it, and I hope the best for what's going on. And all you can do is keep pushing ahead, keep making contacts, keep your nose to the grindstone, and keep fighting and keep building, brother. It's really good to have you on.
Thank you, Judge James. This is Comrade Andersen here. Thank you, everyone, and as always, patria or muerte. Take care, man.
Thank you, comrade.
Right
All
on,
the best.
brother. Wow, that was very powerful. So I guess we'll do our concluding remarks and call it a night, brother Fox.
Well, I think it's actually essential. It's not just classic works where you know have the traditional Marxist sense, Marxist works or Lenin's, etc. I think some of these programs of struggles around the world, of anti-imperialist struggles, such as the one we just studied today. I think it's an essential part of our future, of our understanding of how movements move forward. And I think it's something that we can also take inspiration from and develop further. I mean, for example, in the US, you guys with the Center of Political Innovation and 4-point plan. That's great. We're developing up our plan as well for Australians for a New Democracy, for something that's unique for Australia. So it's but actually out of the countries, the developing countries, be it in Central South America, be it in Africa or Asia, wherever. I mean, it's something we can always look at and study and look to maybe adopting a few things for our own immediate struggles here in Australia, in our own respective countries.
Right on, right on. So we're doing this series on demands. We did the Black Panthers. We did Emiliano Zapata's Plan de Ayala. I think next in the series, we're going to be doing the Garveyite Manifesto.
Hmm.
And we'll look for that soon. I announced that I was going to do a anti-imperialist America on the South, but I've been so exhausted with work, I was unable to get around to it. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Please like this video. Please subscribe if you have not subscribed. Please share this on Twitter, on YouTube. Please reach out to me in the comment section. Send me a message on Twitter at DustJames90 if you would like to participate in more events. Um, and thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you. All the best.